So they got me into the car, and I like woke up as they were putting me in, and I opened my eyes, and my one brother was looking down at me, and he said, "You'll be okay." And all I could see was dense, colorful energy, and it was so bright. I winced and I closed my eyes, and then I opened them again, and he was literally invisible. I couldn't see him. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't see him because there was so much dense energy between me and him. So that was the beginning of realizing that there was more going on than I knew. And then how was I going to function? But the thing is, I never saw normally again. So even to this day, I see living, breathing energy structures around human beings that are at least 15 to 20 feet out from their physical bodies that incorporate the physical body and an electromagnetic aura inside of this larger structure.
Hello, my dear friends. I'm Donald Lee, and this is Expressing and Revealing Your Truth with Donald Lee. It's a podcast in which I help you understand the truth about who you really are and how you can express and reveal that truth in the world. To do that, I interview people who have had transformational spiritual experiences, the type of experiences that many of us wish we had, but never do. Yet by learning from my guests' experiences and the wisdom they've gained from those experiences, all of us can gain a bigger vision of who we really are and how we can live our lives more fully, more peacefully, more lovingly. Be sure to download my free mini ebook containing 5 of the 50 parables from my popular book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life. These little parables are short, easy to read, inspiring, and also help you to understand more about who you really are. There's a link in the show notes to get your free ebook. In this episode, I interview the amazing Desda Zuckerman. I've been following Desda for several years, and I'm delighted that she has agreed to come on the show. She has seen auras since she was a child, but after receiving a concussion in a car accident when she was 14 years old, Desda immediately started seeing so much colored light around people that she could hardly see their physical bodies. It took her several years just to learn to see normally again, and then several decades to make sense out of the incredible colored energy around everyone's body. Desda eventually realized that she was actually seeing the anatomy of our energy bodies. She wrote and published the book, Your Sacred Anatomy, and now teaches people how to understand this subtle energy and to use this knowledge to improve their lives. I'm sure you will enjoy this fascinating conversation with Desda Zuckerman. Hello again, my friends. We are here today with the absolutely incredible Desda Zuckerman. Now, you know, we talk on my show and we interview people who have all kinds of what you might call spiritual gifts or psychic abilities, that sort of thing. But Desda's is absolutely unique, and you have to really see the pictures in her book to understand what she sees. Right? All of us perceive reality a little bit differently, and those, as I'm sure you know, dear listeners and viewers, though some people can see auras, and most of us can't. Some people can see the spirits of departed people, and most of us can't. And we call these spiritual gifts. But what Desda actually sees through her physical eyes will blow your mind. So let's jump into the story of how this developed in Desda's life. Desda, welcome. It's a joy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Donald. I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm so flattered you asked me to speak to your people and be on your podcast. I think this is a great way to have an alternative information source out there, and I'm thrilled to be part of your personal journey and your podcast. This is great.
It's my honor. Absolutely.
So I guess if you want to hear my story, it kind of starts early in my life because by the time I was 6 years old, I realized that I saw kind of more than what most people saw. So I saw very pretty, soft, kind of pastel auras around people, around animals, and around plants. And um, when I would look up at the stars, I'd see auras around the stars. And so I had this
Really?
very beautiful, kind of soft, gentle ability, which really is clairvoyance, and it's early clairvoyance. And that was the way it
Wait,
was.
I got to interrupt you right away. So, does that mean, because I thought only living things had auras. So, does that imply that even stars like our sun have a consciousness?
Well, I think it might imply that, but it definitely implies that they are alive.
Okay. Well, I mean, being alive kind of absolutely involves consciousness
Yeah. So, but I
of some
don't think
kind,
it's the
right?
same it's not the same kind of consciousness as you and I have. It's a planetary
That's right.
consciousness or a star consciousness, which is they're different species. So,
Yes.
yeah, so
It's difficult for most people to grasp. And I didn't really come to that understanding until fairly recently, I think, that basically everything, certainly every living thing, has a consciousness of some sort.
mhm.
And even things that we don't think of as being living have consciousness of some sort.
I mean, you can
Yeah.
even look at, a table that's made from a tree that's been dead for 100 years, and that table still has an energetic awareness, a consciousness of sorts. It
Yeah.
can, it can capture and hold memories and thoughts and, beliefs, ideas. If you're ever so lucky as to, be in the presence of a piece of furniture that was used by someone famous who did great writing or who created on a table. You can see the frequency of that energetic popping off of the table. Only the a completely dead piece of wood, right? But it's
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
an essence and energy, and it's we imbue things with our frequencies, with our energies, and people who are in the throes of deep creative work, um, that it's so powerful. It's why the resolute desk in the Oval Office is so famous because so many presidents have sat at that desk and made such powerful choices, decisions that affected thousands and thousands of people. So there's a quality, and another one that's really famous is the stone seat that they use to crown the kings of, Britain
England.
is a
Okay.
famous and ancient inanimate object, right? But it's got
Yeah.
all kinds of juju. It's got lots of power, So, I think that, looking up at the stars and seeing the auras around the stars and seeing them around planetary bodies as well, taught me very early on without ever having to hear a lecture or learn anything from anybody that there was distinction between those things and that those things had something more to offer maybe than just lights in the sky that didn't have
Right.
any real meaning for me as a little kid.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. I'm glad we took that little detour. So
There'll
back
be
as a little
more.
kid, and you realized, yeah, you realized that, huh? That's funny. You mean not everybody's seeing what I see?
Yeah, well, I actually didn't realize that for a while. So
Yeah.
around when I was around 6 or 7, I referred to something and I said something about the lights, and somebody said to me, "What do you mean by the lights?" Because I always called what I saw around people the lights. And
Yeah.
At one point, I was told that I just had a really active imagination, and wasn't that wonderful, and maybe I'll be an artist someday. So it just nobody took it too seriously, you know? So
Yeah.
it wasn't until I was, 12, and had a death experience that things actually changed for me, begin to change. I was traveling through Mexico with my parents in our Volkswagen bus. It was 1962, so the roads in Mexico were kind of
Where were
funky.
you in '62? You were in in Mexico.
I was in a Volkswagen bus. And, we had been in Mexico about 2 weeks, and we had only made it down as far as Guadalajara. You know, we in those days, there weren't the big freeways they have now. There were just
Yeah.
roads, and they
Yeah.
were dirt roads, so, it was like that the whole way, bouncy, bouncy, bouncy. But we got to Guadalajara, and we checked into a hotel, and I had a profound event in the night. My parents went to dinner, and, the us 3 kids stayed in the hotel room with food ordered in, and we're watching TV, and, I had an appendicitis attack, and I fainted, and, the bed collapsed because I was in the rollaway, and the bed collapsed,
Well,
and, my parents found me in this weird position with the bed down, and I was totally unconscious. So they lifted me up, and then the next day, we went walking all over Guadalajara, and I didn't feel good, and then we changed hotels because for various reasons, and we went to a new hotel, and the next morning, my whole family got up and went to breakfast, and I said, "I'm not hungry, Imma stay in bed." And they left me, and then they sent a meal to the room, and when the meal got to the room, the young man opened the door to bring the food in, and I was bright yellow, and he said, "I think you're sick." Put the food down and went and got my mom and dad, who then called a local doctor who came and examined me and said, "Yes, not only has she got hepatitis, but she also has acute appendicitis, and it looks like it's going to rupture any second now." So they began treating me, and I was taken to the hospital in the Volkswagen over cobblestone streets like this. Not great. So we got to this gorgeous old hacienda, and where all the nurses were nuns, and it was quiet and beautiful, and my mother and I were put in a room together, and she was given a bed, and they brought her food as well as me, and they wanted to bring the hepatitis down, so they kept giving me penicillin, and they were giving me we counted 40 shots in like 2 or 3 days, and so they kept me there at the hospital, and, finally, I went into anaphylaxis and became allergic to the penicillin, and
oh,
so in that moment, my appendix decided to rupture, and so I died because that was pretty intense for a little kid, and they rolled me into surgery and brought me back really quickly, but in the meantime, I had had a near-death experience. So now we call it near death, and for a long time, I just thought of it as an interesting vision, you know? So
yep.
what happened was that I lifted up out of my body, and I looked down, and I saw them just in pandemonium trying to save me, and, knocking things over and bumping into each other. It was chaos, and I just kinda looked down and went, "Uh-huh," and I floated through the wall. And as I floated through the wall, I looked down at a courtyard, and I saw in the courtyard a beautiful man and a beautiful woman. My parents were beautiful people, and they were sitting on the bench together, holding hands by a fountain. And there were 2 little boys who were playing with their army cars in the dirt and on the fountain. And I remember looking down at this group of people who were my family, and I had absolutely no connection. I just looked at them and went, "Oh, those are nice people," and I kept going. I didn't stop and go, "Oh, mama," I just went, "Oh, those are nice people," and I kept on traveling, and I went to this light that I saw, which looked kind of like a doorway, and it turned out to be a hall, And as I was floating down this hallway, I was really focused on the door, and I saw there were things on the walls of the hallway, but they didn't really capture my attention. And I got to the door, and the door was made of cherubs. So it was like a wooden carved door with cherubs who were winking at me and waving like that and going, they were like little kid, you know, cute little angels. And so I reached out to push the door open, and the door just flew open. And standing in the doorway was this, the only way I could describe him is how I described him at the time when I told my mother all about it. Was a big white guy, and he was white, solid white like a light bulb white, and glowing, and I felt so much love. I felt so loved. I was just looking at him thinking, "Hi, you're so nice. I can feel you." And on the left and right side, down at his feet, there were two sort of dog-like creatures that had like lion's manes, and one had a lizard tail and the other had a lion tail, but they were dogs, and they just looked like a combination of about 5 different animals, and they were sort of curled up at his feet, and one was like licking itself, and their tails were flitting, and I wasn't scared of them, but they were there, and I wanted to get behind the big white guy because what was behind there looked really interesting. So I kept trying to like get around him. I didn't speak to him. I didn't do anything. I just tried to get around the big white guy. And as I was doing that, I saw like maybe 100 people spread out having picnics all over these beautiful rolling grassy lawns with trees and incredible, brilliant tropical flowers and roses and everything from every conceivable flower book you've ever read, just all over. And there was a pond with some kids playing, and they were in paddle boats, and there was a sailboat, and there was a carousel, and in the distance I could see this gleaming white, alabaster white, shining building. And I was very interested in that building. I wanted to get to that building. But first, I looked at the people, and they all noticed what was going on. And they were all going, come on in. And they had so much love for me. I could hardly stand there. I tried so hard to get around the big white guy, and finally he just went like this, like that. And when he did that, I flew backwards, and I flew backwards so hard that I had that sensation of like losing my breath. And I went backwards, and then boom, I was in the recovery room in the hospital.
Wow.
So my mother said to me when I told her this whole story, she said, "Well, you had a nice dream." And when I described what
Yeah.
had been going on in the surgical theater, how they'd all been running around crazy and trying to, and knocking into each other, and somebody had dropped some instruments and there was noise, and so my mother asked the doctor. She said, "What was it like in the operating theater when you took her in?" And the doctor said, "Oh, I was so irritated. They were so completely all over the place, and everyone was really concerned and worried because she was dead." So we were trying to and everyone was kind of like not jumping into action. And so he kind of described the same scene that I had witnessed. So my mother thought, well, that's interesting, but she didn't really pursue it with me. So that was my first death experience, and I just kinda shoved it, you know? And I was 12, and this was, who knows, maybe that happened to everybody every day, I didn't know. So so the next thing that happened was we were in Mexico, and we were in Guadalajara, and so about a week later, we were finally in Mexico City. And the first place we went was Teotihuacan, which is an ancient Mexican ruin. And it's a Toltec ruin with tall pyramids. And in 1962, we were the only people there. The only people.
Wow.
There, and there were maybe a half dozen little kids selling gum, chicle. And they were, trying to sell these little chiclets boxes. And at one point, there was a woman who came and sort of was watching them all and had some artifacts to sell. And we were just there alone. So I climbed with my mother very slowly up the tallest pyramid, the Pyramid to the Sun. And when we got up to the top,
Yeah,
I stood.
because you've just had major surgery. You've just had your abdomen cut open and
Yeah,
yeah, almost and you died and you just came back to life.
yeah. So it's like maybe 10 days later, I'm here on the
Yeah.
top of the Teotihuacan Pyramid of the Sun. I'm exhausted. I make it up the side of the pyramid. And I finally I'm so tired. I decide I'm going to sit down. Well, the pyramid.
So you lie down on the sacrificial stone where they cut people's
No, I didn't
hearts
do
out.
that. That was a different pyramid. But I got up to the top, and what I did was I turned around because I'd been facing the pyramid as I climbed, because the steps were like really skinny and tall. So it was hard
Yeah.
climbing. So as I got to the top, I turned around and I looked out, and there was a big plaza there. And at the end of the plaza, and it's a very big site, and at the end of the site, there's another pyramid way down to the end. So I look out, and the entire plaza is filled with people, filled with people in ancient dress. There's a whole line of like what look like priests or monks who are all in black with their heads covered with black, like some kind of black paint. Later figured out it was probably blood. And they were walking in a line. And then there was a market where people were buying things. And there were children and there were women in these very colorful rebosos, shawls that they were wearing, and men and women all dressed in white, and everyone was just milling around, and there were lots of warriors there, really fully decked out. And I just stood there and looked out at this scene, and
Your consciousness went back in time,
I could
right?
hear sounds, and then my mother said, "Are you okay?" And I turned around and I went, "You won't believe what I," and then I looked back and it was gone.
It's
So
all
I
gone.
sat down, tried to collect myself, but from that moment on, I began to have visions. So that was
Right.
beginning. That was my very first vision. And from then on, like I'd had events in my life where I had maybe seen a little fairy, or I'd seen a couple of ghosts, but this was like a full-on waking vision, conscious vision. And so
Yeah.
I kind of just logged it. But then every single ancient pyramid and city we visited for the next year, I had some kind of vision while I was there. And so it was fascinating. Somehow I was able, not knowing how I did it, to just tune in to the energetic of what had been there before. So,
Yeah.
a lot came out of that, but that again I was 12. And so I kind of shelved that. And then we lived in Mexico for another while, and then we moved to New York City, where my father worked at the World's Fair in 1964, and I sat in front of the TV and saw the Beatles, on Ed Sullivan's show, screaming with my little neighbor friend. And I just
Were
thought, my
you were
life
one of the
was
streamers?
oh God, yes. I was 14. I was primed. So so then a little bit later, and it was on, well, it was Good Friday. I don't remember the date, but it was Good Friday that year. My mom was driving the Volkswagen bus back from we'd gone to church at St. James of Laddingtown there on the North Shore of Long Island. We'd gone to the church and gone to the, Good Friday service, and then we were all dressed in our clothes, and we as kids always fought over who was gonna get the middle seat, so I won, I got the middle seat, and so I sat down and I leaned my back against the double doors, which, we'd lived in this van for, like, a year, and I leaned against the doors, not realizing they weren't fully closed, and my mom
Oh,
took off and drove down the road and, at about 40 miles an hour, went around a slight bend, and I flew out of the car and flipped over
wow.
and landed on my head on the side of the road. And my mom actually thought she had run over me, but she didn't, thank goodness. But the last thing I saw before I was knocked unconscious was a crow sitting on top of a phone pole or an electrical pole. I think it was a phone pole. And he was looking at me like this, looking down, and he was surrounded by this beautiful lavender light. It was just beautiful. I
Oh,
remember
wow.
looking at him going, "You're so pretty." And here I am flying through the air and I see this, "You're so pretty." And I hear in my mind, I hear, "You will be all right." And that was the only thing I heard. And boom, hit the ground, knocked unconscious, scraped up, banged up. I still have a dent in my head, from the experience. And, my brothers lifted me into the Volkswagen, and they were little, so it was kinda wild getting me into the car. So they got me into the car, and I, like, woke up as they were putting me in, and I opened my eyes, and my one brother was looking down at me, and he said, "You'll be okay." And all I could see was dense, colorful energy, and it was so bright, I winced and I closed my eyes, and then I opened them again, and he was literally invisible. I couldn't see him. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't see him because there was so much dense energy between me and him. So, that was the beginning of realizing that there was more going on than I knew. And then how was I going to function? The doctor said there was nothing wrong with me, and I was lucky I only had a concussion. Didn't crack my skull, yay. So, but the thing is, I never saw normally again. So, even to this day, I see living, breathing energy structures around human beings that are at least 15 to 20 feet out from their physical bodies that incorporate the physical body and an electromagnetic aura inside of this larger structure.
Just a little break from the program to mention a couple of things. Firstly, if you're enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a short comment. It really helps with the algorithm to find more people who would enjoy these interviews. Also, if you're interested in spiritual growth, you might be interested in my series of spiritual books. As a spiritual author and a former band director, I use my little "the band director" trademark in these books because I use music as a metaphor for life and the journey of becoming a musician as a metaphor for our spiritual journey. There are 3 books in this series. The Band Director's Lessons About Life is a book of modern day parables inspired by events from my teaching career. When you're working with kids, things naturally come up that we sometimes call teachable moments. Little events where you realize there's a bigger lesson happening right now than the alternate F sharp fingering on the clarinet that I was trying to teach. I started writing some of these little stories down and turning them into modern day parables. So The band director's lessons about life has 50 little parables. It's a bit like a chicken soup for the soul book. Each parable is about 3 pages long. Each begins with a story that happened at school. And then there's a reflection section that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story. That is, it explains what the spiritual metaphor means. The band director's lessons about life is easy to read, makes a great gift, and expresses many universal spiritual principles in an easy to understand way. If you want to go deeper in your spiritual growth, I've also published a study guide to accompany the book of parables. It turns the band director's lessons about life into a year-long course in spiritual development. You will spend a week on each of the 50 parables. There is a deeper teaching about the meaning of each parable, reflection and discussion questions, especially helpful if you would like to use the study guide in a group setting, and a different meditation for each lesson. The third book in this series is a little book titled The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. This little book explains a simple 3-step process for putting your spiritual growth into high gear. You might also be interested in my 2-book series about the craziness in our world today. The first book, What the Hell is Going On? The web of fraud that is enslaving everyone and how we can escape to freedom, is still the best big picture expose of what's really going on behind all this craziness. It includes a spiritual perspective of what's happening, which most books leave out. But it also looks at the economics, the philosophy, the psychology, the history, etc., of the many trends that just don't make sense and are, in fact, elaborate frauds. The second book in this series focuses more on solutions to the mess we're in. It's The Way Forward: How to Escape the Totalitarian Control of the New World Order and Heal from its Trauma. This book explains the 3 types of warfare we're being subjected to: spiritual warfare, psychological warfare, and 5th-generation warfare, and how we can sensibly respond on these 3 levels of body, mind, and spirit. You can learn more about all of my books at my website, www.cominghomespirit.com, because after all of us are on a spiritual journey back home to God. So that's cominghomespirit.com. You can also go directly to my Shopify page at cominghomespirit.myshopify.com, where you can purchase my books directly from me in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. I can now ship paperback books to the United States and Canada. If you're enjoying this podcast, I really think you'll enjoy my many books as well. Now, back to the program.
So being kind of a thinker, I started trying to figure out what I was seeing. And I searched libraries. I went into New York City, went to a bookstore and tried to find books, and I couldn't find anything on what I was seeing and how it worked. I didn't know what was going on, and it was so hard for me to read because I had to, when I looked at a page, I had to keep my focus really strong, and my intuition, really clearly told me that if I held intention and looked with focus, I could probably see what I wanted to see. And so I would get the page to open up so I could read. And then I would get somebody's face to kind of open up so I could see it. So I learned what I over
There
time
was this
called recognition.
energetic light that you see around people.
Mm,
You see it around books and other objects like that too?
everything.
Wow.
Everything has.
Well, I'm not surprised you couldn't find anything in books. No, to my knowledge, nobody else, even in the whole history of humanity, has seen the kind of things that you see and that you've put into your books.
Well, that's actually one of the things that was kind of a exciting point, because when I wrote my book, which is called Your Sacred Anatomy, so here's my book. Your Sacred Anatomy. It's 354 pages, 18 pages of glossary. It's an incredible compilation of maybe 45 years of research, um, of me drawing pictures, writing about things, and then seeing what I could do with them. And then
Right.
finally realizing later on other people were interested and they wanted to know what I was doing. And so I started to teach in about 1998. And I'd taught singing before that. And I, had kind of a different take on how to do that because I had used all my sort of sensitivities, and I did psychic readings for 17, 18 years. I had a whole class that I taught called The Way of the Singer, which was, intuitive singing. And, I was into kind of off the beaten track, if you will, information and accumulation of knowledge. I'd by then read Blavatsky, and I had read, a lot of the Tibetan writers, and I had done as much as I could to keep inspiring myself to learn more and more and more. And by the time I was getting asked to teach, I had analyzed what I saw as a kind of subtle anatomy. And I had determined this by lots and lots of different things. One of the most amazing things was when I was pregnant with my daughter. I have a beautiful daughter, and she's closer to 50 than 40 now. And so it was a long time ago. And when I was pregnant, I suddenly one day started to see like living x-rays. So I could look at a person and it was like their skin melted away and I could see their organs. A little too much for me, but I could see that.
Yeah, like the old saying, too
Yeah,
much
it was a little
information.
bit much, you know. And so I could see that, and then I sort of suddenly realized that the energy I was seeing around people that I had for years seen around people and been writing about on slips of paper and, napkins and all this, that it was actually anatomy. It was subtle anatomy. And so the thing was is it was consistent. I saw the same stuff around everybody. To more or less. I mean, there were some uniquenesses to people, but by and large, people were very consistently alike each other.
Yeah.
So that was when I began
So you
drawing the
kind of
anatomy.
like the way that everybody has a head, a torso, two legs, 2 feet, 2 arms, 2 hands,
Exactly.
2 ears, 2 eyes, one nose, one mouth. Yeah,
Right.
there's the common structure, which naturally led you to think, hey, what I'm seeing is also anatomy.
So
But just like everybody has a little bit different face and stuff like that, and different mannerisms, and
yeah,
there's
exactly.
some identifying characteristics in the sacred anatomy too.
And then I started to, I was fully exposed to the new age, and I had clarity that not very many people saw what I saw. So when I put my book out in 2012 is when it came out, I started getting letters. And I got letters from all over the world because it's on Amazon and I've sold thousands of copies of my book at this point. And I got letters from South Africa, I got a letter from Finland, I got a letter from Shanghai in China, and I got 2 or 3 letters from Americans, and they were all saying, "Thank God somebody sees what I do. Thank God I'm not all alone." And across the board, they were thanking me for having created the book because now they knew they weren't crazy. And so it was a really, validating moment. Um,
Right.
and and we had all kinds of extraordinary things happen when this work was committed to a book form. Suddenly, because the book is an owner's guide to the human energy structure, and it's got book 1, which is kind of easier, geared towards sort of everybody, and then book 2, which is a technical manual, and it analyzes some things like the chakras. What are chakras? And everything I read about chakras was either wrong or just not enough. It just wasn't all there. And so,
Right.
I began to isolate myself and not read at all at a certain point. because I just wanted to sort of be really pure in what I was bringing forth. And then I taught practitioner apprentices, and I've trained about 100 apprentices, which is huge and exhausting. When that was over, I started just training, I started going for training practitioners only, not apprentice practitioners, because the apprentice thing is really that's a commitment. And so, most people study with me for 4 or 5 years, and they essentially collect another doctoral degree because I have a lot of people that already have doctorates in, physics and healing and teaching and um, all kinds of practices and all kinds of careers. People are attracted to my
Right.
work who are spiritual practitioners who've been sitting on a cushion for 20 to 30 years, usually. That's usually who comes to me. So we're starting to try to get me out to a larger community. Maybe people who've only been sitting on a cushion for 5 years, So that's those are transformational experiences that completely altered my trajectory in life. The death
Yes.
experience opened me up to a possible realm that I had no real conscious knowledge of. And the really the bonk on the head, as we so gleefully express it, which was really a hard whack, it brought me
Yeah.
into another really almost dimensional realm. So I'm able to see
Definitely a different dimensional realm.
it,
Absolutely.
it seems like I'm able to see into another dimensional reality. And one of the coolest things, and Donald, I know you'll appreciate this because of your years of teaching, is that I seem to be able to teach people to feel this stuff. Maybe they can't
Wow.
see it, but they can feel it. And even better, they can actually learn to work with it like I do. So that validated it for me. So
Great.
anecdotal information is one form of scientific exploration, and that's I'm the queen of that. So I've collected a lot of data.
Well, yeah, I'm excited and even surprised to hear that there are other people in the world who see what you see, because I've never, ever heard of anybody who sees what you see.
Yeah.
But as with all of these, spiritual experiences and gifts, the vast majority of people like learn very quickly. Keep your mouth shut and don't tell anybody about it.
Yeah, well, that's true. Most people are afraid of, people who are off the grid, a little bit different. But
Yeah.
I tend to attract people who are already there, you know, and and most of
Oh,
the
we do.
people
We do. We attract to ourselves people who are,
know,
people who are like us, and people who we need at a particular point in our life, right?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like my students have been my best teachers, and because they ask the question and I have to answer it, and so the information comes. I think having come from I come from a lineage of psychics. My grandmother
Oh,
was
really?
She was a table tipper and a spiritualist and studied with Paramahansa Yogananda in the early 20s and in the 20s. And so
Well,
my
it's funny that your mother wouldn't have helped you understand your death experience and stuff like that then.
my
She
mother
must have
didn't
known.
understand much. My mother wasn't
Oh,
a
okay.
student of this kind of spirituality, and she had gone towards the realm of like religion. So she explained everything as a religious kind of moment. And that
Right.
never really worked for me. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. So I kept I kept looking, and I think I'm a little more sciency than my mom was, but my mom's psychic ability was premonitions. So she would have premonitions. My grandmother did all kinds of things. She read tarot. She loved the Ouija board. She was a spiritualist, but she was also a student of yoga, and so she was interested in consciousness raising and transformation, kind of before it was really popular or a thing. My great grandmother read tea leaves and would hold your hand and tell you if you'd amount to anything. She was a Victorian, you know. I remember holding one of my brother's hands and she looked at it and she went like that. I thought, "Oh my
You're never gonna
God,
amount to
don't touch me."
what what an encouraging thing to say to a kid, but
I
that
know.
that was the way in those days.
Well, she had lots of children. She was one of these women who had 9 children, you know, and I
Yeah.
I think she might have had a couple extra that, like, she didn't really think much of, you know? But my grandmother was the bigger influence in my life. My mom was more traumatized because her premonitions would be like, "There's going to be an earthquake and, all these buildings will fall in and people will die," that kinda, like, sort of hysterical level.
But when you live in San Francisco, that's a useful premonition to get.
Well, it's
Like, get
helpful.
out of Dodge, man, because
It's helpful. San Francisco is a little bit of an earthquake zone,
yeah, a
but
little bit.
we're doing okay. There've been so many moments in my life, and I think if I were to wrap up what I think of transformational experiences, every single moment is valuable and has the
Yes.
potential to transform you. We can change completely in an instant. Transformation doesn't need to be, you don't need to experience traumatization to have a transformational experience. You can have a transformational experience just looking at the most extraordinary golden rose. I mean, that can crack you open. And I think what I've learned after really over 60 years of being on the path is that we all have our own way to go and we all have the right to make it ours and to learn from that path the most powerful information that we need. So no one else can really tell you what your path is, what your purpose is, or how to get there. People can share information and they can share skills, they can share techniques, but really arriving requires study and it requires presence. So being present in the moment is the most important thing. And the best way to get there is through spiritual practice, whatever that means to you.
We get to choose our spiritual practice, and it typically changes as we grow. In fact, in my little book, The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth, the the three simple steps. The third step is practice. Is it in my band director series of books, I use music as a metaphor for life and the journey of becoming a musician as a metaphor for our spiritual journey. And if you want to be a musician, got to practice.
You
So
have
the
to.
third step in the three simple step process to spiritual development, third step is practice. And that's your spiritual practice. And you get to decide what that is. And you can change your mind whenever you want, right? But it involves reading and praying and, often some kind of uh, a social or group experience, whether that's going to church or, whatever your chosen path is.
Mhm.
Um, and, and of course, going within in various ways. It should include meditation, but we all get to choose that. But yes, the spiritual practice. I'm good. You know what? The interviews I've done so far, nobody has used that term yet.
Hmm.
But it's really a great term. We need to have some kind of a spiritual practice in our life.
It's absolutely critical if you're going to develop this more sensitive, intuitive, insightful side. And I
Yeah.
think it's critical for leaders and teachers. It's critical for parents to instill in their charges the concept of a spiritual discipline and practice that that
Right.
gives you that sense of landing in your body, of being present in the moment. 'Cause having been bonked on the head like that, I mean, I could have spent a lot of time floating in outer space, but it was really important for me to come into my body, to really come into my own. And
Right.
that's the thing. I think that's the major takeaway for me in some ways from that experience is you may be shown the stars, you may be shown all kinds of things, but if you're not present in your body, you cannot share those things. You become lost in it, you know? And
Yeah.
that's not there's
Yeah.
no value in having a transformational experience that you cannot then translate into the language of whatever country you're in, whatever world you're in, and bring it forward to support others. Because in point of fact, we're all here to support the continued evolutionary development of the human species and to lift the frequency of our beings, you know? And there's no better way to get there than spiritual practice. And a lot of people use sacred anatomy work as their spiritual practice. It seems to work for them. I am a practicing Tibetan Buddhist, and I use various mantras and meditations and visualizations, and I use a practice called Dzogchen, which is I found to be very gratifying and really collaborative with what I do. So everybody's a little different. In my community of, some thousand people, I have every major religion represented, you know? There's
Yeah.
somebody from every religion because true spirituality transcends religion and
Yes.
dogma. It opens the doors, and that's why spiritual practice is important because it gives us that place to meet on, that playing field where we can all meet. Because in point of fact,
Yes.
we're in a field together. And if,
Yeah.
Rupert Sheldrake has brought that idea of the morphic field and we are sharing a field right now in our conversation. This is a learning field, this is a sharing field, and we're in it together. And the people that are listening to this are in it together with us, and that kind of field transcends time, it transcends space, it's outside of what we could call our reality. It's what Michael Harner referred to as non-ordinary reality. It's outside of our
Right.
normal understanding of what
Yeah.
is so. And I
Yeah.
think it's exciting to
I
think
I I I call it spiritual reality
spiritual reality. Yes, absolutely.
because
Spirit-
it's real, but it's not physical. It's a different reality,
The reality of
coexisting.
consciousness. A lot of people say that my writing in your sacred anatomy is similar to reading Tibetan texts. That it's dense, it has that quality, that dense quality, and, I don't necessarily see that, but sometimes it seems like
Well,
other people do, so it
yeah, well, because you understand it so well.
yeah,
You wrote it.
part
Like, you
of
went over those ideas and over and I mean, I'm a writer too. I know how it goes. You go, "How do I express this idea?" How do like, I know it's in by the time the book's published, like, you know the stuff inside out, and other people are looking at it for the first time going, "What?
yeah, well,
What is this stuff?" So I can see that. Well, I'll find out very soon because as I mentioned, I've ordered your book. It's supposed to arrive next week, so I'll start getting into it, and I'll let you know if it's kinda cracking open my brain too.
well, enjoy, and, I hope you, read the whole thing because there's a lot in there that's of value. I'll tell you one final story and then, we should probably wrap up, but the final story that I have to tell you is in, 2009, on December 5th, 2009, um, I sat up bolt upright in bed and had like a lightning bolt in my head, light streaming from one side to the other, and I heard a voice saying, "You're having a stroke." And so I had a stroke and the next and I it was very painful and I finally laid down and I went to sleep. And I literally couldn't, like, figure out how to wake my husband up sleeping right by me, because my brain was not tracking, it wasn't working.
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
so then the next day, my daughter took one look at me and said, "What's wrong with your face?" And I looked in the mirror and
Yes.
so anyway,
Yeah.
we had
Yeah.
some brain scans and we just determined I had a stroke, and then I had an appointment to get, an MRI in, like, a month from now. So I went through the Christmas season, gave a party and all this, and it was the most chaotic experience of my life. I had all kinds of crazy things happen. I got a speeding ticket, and I crashed the side of my car. I was not safe to be driving. But nobody had told me to not drive, and nobody had told me this was serious, and nobody had none of that. So I in February, on the 26th of February, I had finished writing a a manual for one of my classes, and I had taken it to the printer, and I was all happy about that, and I went to see the neurologist who had done the MRI that I had had a few weeks before, and she was telling me, "You've had a stroke." And right at that moment, I had another stroke. So I had a second stroke and finally went to the hospital and that was taken care of, and we moved on from there. So I there's a lot of story here, but I don't want to go into too much because it's not that interesting. Suffice to say, we finally figured out what had happened, what kind of stroke, and why I was unable to think. So I was unable to think. I was able to speak, but I couldn't remember words, and I would get lost in a sentence and lost in a paragraph, and kind of not know where I was going with it all.
Yeah.
And
Actually, you know what? In my life, I've run into a lot of people like that who know how to talk, but they don't know how to think.
well, it was a mess in there. And
I'm joking.
so I had had years and years of meditation. So I started meditating above it. I started meditating up above it. And I began to work with what I call the four aspects of the authentic self. So these four aspects basically said to me, "We're going to write a book." So I said, "Okay." Now I just sat down in front of my computer, I put my hands on the keyboard, and I wrote a book. And the thing is it was exactly what I knew. It's what I had been studying. It was all of it. And all of the graphics I put together, I did a lot of the work. But the four aspects, my authentic nature actually wrote the book. So it's a very interesting piece of writing because it doesn't, it's not like a regular lady wrote it. It's like there was some other kind of spiritual presence that wrote it. So
Yeah.
it's
Bypassing your brain because your brain wasn't working quite right.
yeah, and guess what? My brain healed.
That's beautiful, amazing, and beautiful, miraculous, and
Amazing.
praise the Lord.
Amazing. I was told by doctors that it would never heal.
What's the title of that book?
And the title is Your Sacred Anatomy, An Owner's Guide to the Human Energy Structure.
Oh, that's the one that you
That's
did.
the
Okay, I
same
thought
one.
you had already published that. Oh,
I
yeah,
have
because that was
already published in
the
2012, I
that was
believe.
published in 2012, and you had the stroke in 2009. Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to give you that story because that's transformational.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, that tells all of us that um, there's absolutely something beyond human in your book, The Sacred
There
Anatomy.
is. It's extra
Yeah.
human.
And I also just as a little bit of I also have it might be your latest book. I think that the wonderful little book about fairies and yeah.
Fairies and
It's,
elves and divas and
yeah, do you have a copy of that one within arm's reach so you could just pick up and show the cover?
um
That's a wonderful little book. And you see these creatures, right?
oh yeah.
That's another little thing. Yet, Edgar Casey saw these magical beings of the natural world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Edgar Cayce saw these little beings as a child.
Well, so did I. I've kind of always thought of Edgar Cayce as a friend. It's one of my favorite illustrations.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's Maeve. She's the queen of the fairies.
The Queen of the Fairies.
Queen
Oh,
of the
beautiful.
fairies. I saw her in not in Ireland, in England,
Good.
near the
That's
Ashdown
beautiful.
Forest.
Our listeners and viewers, I highly recommend that you check out the work of Desda Zuckerman. Can you tell us your website? I think it's My Sacred Anatomy, right?
It's Your Sacred Anatomy.
Your Sacred
Yeah.
Anatomy.com.
www.yoursacredanatomy.com. And I offer classes all the time. Free classes. You can come and just listen to me talk, or one is a Sangha, where I do a little meditative, focused intention setting. It's just a short half hour once a month. And the other is is called Ask Me Anything. And it's fun. Sometimes we get into some interesting stuff. And it's mostly about the sacred anatomy and spiritual things. And people ask about those things, and I seem to be able to answer those questions. And
It's good.
I have a new class out right now that's called The Deep Dive, and it's a deep dive into the sacred anatomy because the book was 15 years old, and I have a whole lot of new information to share with people, and that new information has just been pouring in for 15 years. So it's a whole nother book, really. But we're going to do it in the context of a class. And the first class that I'm going to teach is devoted to the principles of the sacred anatomy and sacred anatomy energy medicine, which is the healing modality that I created after flopping around trying to figure out what I was seeing for over 50 years. I created this healing modality, and that was inspired really by teaching as well. So my students helped me discover the modality, and they really benefited. And many, many, many of my students make a living doing sacred anatomy energy medicine. You can find them on my website. In fact, you can
yoursacredanatomy.com. There you go. Yeah. And for our listeners, I have been periodically joining the Sunday Sangha. Am I saying that right?
Sangha.
Anyway, I've been following Desda for quite a few years now, and I thoroughly enjoy the times that I join in on Zoom and stuff. Have not ever met in person. That's the way our world goes these days. We're spread out, but through the joy of the internet, we can meet digitally or virtually people all over the world, and it's a great opportunity. And it's certainly been a great pleasure to have you on my podcast. Thank you so much, Desda.
What
God
a joy
bless
to talk
you.
to you.
God bless you on your journey and in your work, and we'll talk again. Bye for now.